I started, my journey with OER really started a long time ago. Like most of us, the things that we go through as students and the teachers that we experience as we go through our educational process and then mentors along the way kind of inform who we are as teachers. And the same was true for me. As a student, I was first generation student. I graduated from high school back in 1995. And so I was finishing up my master's, started teaching in 99 at the college level. But in my undergraduate years, I got married in 1996, in December of 96. So I was very young when I got married. My dad died 3 months later. I was the oldest in my family. So my younger brother was a senior in high school. So I had to help him put together his FAFSA. And my parents that year together made like $13,000. I think my husband and I, as basically teenagers and newlyweds, made more money than my parents did. So just to give you some background on myself, buying textbooks was very difficult for me as a student for a lot of reasons. So I fit into some of the categories of the underrepresented students. So I really identify with that. And that's something that I've always kind of kept in mind as an instructor. One of the things that the early things I did back in the early 2000s is in my freshman English class, I had Little Brown handbook and I kept all my books. I spent all that money on them, so I kept them. And that was one of the books that I was told to teach for one of my classes. And so I'm looking at the new version and I'm looking at my old version and I'm realizing this is the exact same book. They've reorganized some things, but it's the exact same book. So why am I asking students to buy this brand new book when they can buy an older version and save some money and just kind of have to look at the table of contents? So I would teach my students how to look at the table of contents to find the information they needed, try to save them money when I could. I'd loan them a book. I would, do whatever I could to help my students save money. And then I started, obviously when we started to go online. I think back in 2010, I took the Gold Star class at Glendale Community College. And so learned all about how to create good online courses. And so I was putting resources in my online classes so that students could have those for free, things like that. But I didn't really hear the words OER until about 3 or 4 years ago at our convocation here at Yavapai College. Our new vice president gave us all of this data on OER and how it was great for students and just kind of started this initiative. And so I had to it took me a little bit of time to do some research and to look at, okay, here's what I'm offering for students now. I had my tech $25. And that was across 2 classes, possibly 3 with me. So students only had to pay $25 for 3 semesters with me. And so I was like, well, I'm already doing this really great work, keeping costs low and things like that. But the more I got into OER, the more excited I became about it. And I decided to make all of my classes OER classes. And in the process, I wrote 3 textbooks. Well, I created 3 textbooks. So the Worry-Free Writer is my OER textbook for English 101 and 102. Diving into Rhetoric goes along with an Intro to Rhetoric course that I teach. And Say Her Name is a Women in Literature course that I teach. And also with a colleague of mine, Dr. Sandy Van Loo, we created a writer's guide, kind of grammar, editing, citation, all of those kinds of things for Yavapai College students called the Rough Writer's Guide. Our mascot at Yavapai is the Rough Rider. So we thought that was, a fun little play on words. But so just to show you in a few short years, I went from, I really want to help students, but I have no idea what OER is to, wow, I've created 4 OER textbooks. So that's a little bit of my background. And one of the reasons that I really got excited about OER is this. In my freshman comp class, my 101 class, I teach students. They do an assignment where they have to choose a nonprofit and they write about the nonprofit. They have to do research, like what social problem does this nonprofit solve, and put it all together and make an argument about why people should support that nonprofit or that nonprofit is the best at solving this particular problem. And I would always kind of pick a topic and go along with them. And the first semester I did this assignment, Yavapai College opened a student food bank. So, or a food pantry. So I decided, well, I'm going to use this as my sample project. And we started doing research as a class, and we learned things like this, that, 49 food is going to run out. I think the statistic is so high, 3 out of 4 students are hungry at some point in time, or even more, depending on where you are. And so I'm, thinking, well, I'm not going to ask my students to choose between eating or feeding their families. And at a community college, about half of my students are older adults with kids. They're working full time, they're going to school, they're just trying to make it. And I didn't want to ask them to choose a textbook over their kids. And this is another little graph that I found, and if you want to write down that link, you can. I don't have it handy to copy and paste into the chat, but if you look at the price changes, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, this is just a 2019, so this is, almost 3 years old, but if you look at college tuition and textbooks that are almost, 200% more expensive than they were in 1998, it's just insane where we're at. And so we're asking students to spend all of this money to come to school, and it's, they have to make these decisions. And then this is a really great quote from 2020. The pandemic has made it even more difficult for students to cope with such high additional costs. I'm financially independent and solely living off of loans. Tuition is already a lot, so having to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars in textbook fees is really stressful. So back to those early days as a student, just, scraping by. I remember one summer I had to buy a textbook for a Shakespeare class. And, Shakespeare's works are all in the public domain because they're so old, right? But the textbook I had to buy for that class was, I think it was $200. So I'm pretty sure at the time my grocery bill for my husband and I was probably like $25 a week, if that. And so it's like, that was 10 weeks of food for us, and the class was only 5 weeks long. So I ended up being able to check the book out from the library. I don't even think it was a 5-week class because it was in the summer. So I don't even think I had to end up extending that, renew the book. But I feel like, we don't always have those textbooks in the libraries anymore. And, we can't have 100 copies of the English 101 textbook in the library for students to check out. So OER is a really great alternative to fixing that problem for students and giving them the access to the materials they need in order to be successful in our classes. And I'm clicking the wrong button. There we go. So if we look at the impact of textbook costs, 64% of students don't even buy the textbook. 43% take less classes, 41% don't register for a particular course, and 23% end up dropping a course at the end before the course even really gets started. So that's a huge drawback for students. They're either not making progress in their education, or they can't be successful in the class because they don't have the materials. So OER for students benefits them via their financial savings. It increases student success because students are actually getting the textbook. They have the materials so they can be successful. And historically underserved populations have additional benefits. So here's a nice little graphic that shows, part-time students benefit way more than full-time students. Historically underserved students benefit more than white students. Pell Grant recipients benefit more than non-Pell Grant recipients. So you can see that this is a way that not only are we helping all students, but we're especially helping students who are underserved already and they need that additional help, which I think we can all agree that's really important. So what is OER? I keep saying this acronym. OER stands for Open Educational Resources, and they are educational materials and resources offered freely and openly for anyone and available under a license that allows users to use, remix, improve, and redistribute. Sharing ideas and resources and collaborating on projects as part of a community is key to the open education movement. Content in the public domain is also considered OER. and then I'm not going to have you read this. So just a caveat really fast. Matthew reached out to me and said, hey, Karen, nobody from Yavapai College is presenting. Do you want to present something? And I said, well, here's what I can do. I'm really overwhelmed this semester, but I can talk about this course that I teach for faculty, or I could talk about creating an OER textbook. And he said, oh, do the intro to OER, the course for faculty, sort of. So the background of a lot of this information is coming from this class that Yavapai College created to teach faculty about OER and to just lay the foundation for faculty about what OER is and how to create it and how they can start implementing it in their classes. So if the information in a slide isn't cited, it's because it came directly from that class. So this year I'm the faculty OER coordinator or facilitator for that class. So I kind of guide faculty through taking the class. But that has shifted, you know, that role has kind of bounced from faculty to faculty as we all kind of take turns taking this on. So I'm really excited to kind of share with you not only getting started, this crash course in OER, but also highlight a little bit of this cool program that we have at Yavapai for introducing faculty to OER. Okay, so what can you do with OER? So faculty bring OER to life. Open educational resources are innovative, not just because they're free, but because of how teachers adopt and creatively adapt them, bringing them to life in the classroom in order to reach every student. And this is something that I think is really important and something that I really love about OER. So I have one student who I have worked with for several years. She was in my freshman comp classes, then she took every other, she took my rhetoric class, she took my literature class. I've worked with her as a tutor. And so when I finished my textbook for women in literature, she happened to be taking that class and she said, Karen, I can hear you in this book. I can hear your voice. And I think that's one of the best compliments and the best feedback that I've received, because that was my goal, was to have this book sound like me so that when students read it, they could hear me talking to them and hear my voice kind of teaching them these concepts through the textbook. So I think that's a really great plus about this. You know, we've all had to adopt a textbook or change a textbook over the years. I know in composition, I've taught as an adjunct all over the state. I taught full-time at Grand Canyon years and years ago. I've taught at ASU, I've taught at NAU, I've taught at Glendale Community, Coconino Community, and Yavapai now. And so I've been all over the place. So there's different books at each school, you know, through the years. They're like, well, we're going to use this one now. And so you have to kind of take your content and rework it and make the book work for you. But here you can change the book, you can change the text so that it matches what you're teaching in the classroom. You don't have to say, well, we're going to skip this chapter. You can just only include the chapter students need. It's really cool. Anyways, little side note. So you retain the right to make, own, and control copies of your content. You can reuse, you have the right to reuse the content in a wide range of ways. So you can use that OER content in a class, in a study group, on a website, in a video. You can revise OER content to adapt, adjust, modify, or alter the content. You can remix it so you can combine the original or revised content with other material to create something new. So you kind of make a mashup. And this is one of the things that I did in the textbooks I created. I said, okay, well, here's some basic information. Here's my lectures. I'm going to mix this all together. And there's my fantastic chapter. You can also, you retain the right to just redistribute the copies of those, or the original content, your revisions, or your remixes to others. So unlike a book, so if you get a book on Kindle, you don't get to just make copies of that content, right? You don't get to reuse that book in your class. Your students would have to buy the book. You can't revise the book and republish it just without asking for permission. You can't remix it, add your own comments in, and you can't share those copies with the world. So that's the difference between OER and traditional content. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Does anyone have any questions at this point? I am just able to see my screen, so I don't know if there's it looks like there's some stuff going on. Okay, I'll just keep going. All right. So the first thing that we want to talk about with OER is open licensing. So again, here's the difference with a traditional copyright. So if I write something and I get a traditional copyright on it, I reserve all the rights to that. So it's my book. No one else can use it. You know, you can maybe quote from it, but you can't take a whole chapter and put it in your book. You have to go through the traditional means in order to use any of that content. If something is in the public domain, there are no rights to that anymore. Either be, you know, like Shakespeare, he doesn't care anymore who uses his plays, right? So some people just make images and put them in the public domain. They don't care who uses it. So you can reuse it, you can edit it, you can do whatever you want with it because it's in the public domain. A lot of people didn't realize that, you know, like Gutenberg Press, I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but you can go on there and you can search for old literature, books, all kinds of things are on there. It's really fun, a fun place to get lost in. I am an English teacher, just in case you forgot that. But with a Creative Commons license, that's what CC stands for, we basically are telling the world we want to share what we created, but we want to reserve some rights. So basically what we're saying is, yeah, here's this book that I created for my students. Maybe most of it works for you, but there's some that's, you know, you don't like the specific assignments that are in the textbook or something. You can take that textbook and you can even take the whole thing and swap out the assignments. But you have to say, this content came from Karen Palmer's book, The Worry-Free Writer. So that's kind of the difference between open licensing, traditional copyright, and public domain. Okay, so there are 6 Creative Commons licenses, and they go from public domain, which has no restrictions, all the way up to, well, they're kind of in between here, right? All the way up to, here's your copyright, all rights reserved. So public domain is the first Creative Commons license. CC BY is the next one, and that one allows anyone to distribute, remix, adapt, and build on the material in any way. They just have to attribute to the creator. You can even take that content, remix it, and sell it. So you could put it in a book and you could sell the book. And that's okay because it allows for commercial use. CC BY SA is kind of the same, but you have to license the modified material under identical terms. So you can't take a CC BY SA content and then make it CC BY. It has to stay CC BY SA. But again, this allows for commercial use. So you can take something that's a Creative Commons license and you can even sell it. You know, create it, put it in a package and sell that package. CC BY NC allows people to distribute, remix, adapt, build, all of those things, but it's for non-commercial purposes and they have to give attribution. So that's what the BY means. So CC is Creative Commons, BY means you're giving attribution. You're saying where the content came from. And then the other things kind of tell you what they're for. So CC BY NC-SA. So you have to license the modified material under identical terms, give attribution to the creator, and you cannot use it for commercial purposes. So all of my textbooks are licensed this way, CC BY NC-SA. So they have to use the same license and they can't take my work and sell it. That was really important to me because especially in my English 101, 102 textbook, a lot of that content I've created over the past, 20 something years of teaching composition. So it's really kind of it's just my work. And so I don't mind sharing my work, especially when it's helping students, but I don't necessarily want someone to take my work and, create a textbook and sell it. So I think that's something that a lot of folks are concerned about. I don't think I'm the only one. CC BY ND means that you can copy and distribute the material, but you cannot adapt it. So for example, in one of my textbooks, my Women in Literature textbook, I used part of my dissertation in that textbook. And so that only that part of the textbook I license CC by ND because I don't want someone taking my dissertation and changing it. They can go ahead and copy it and use it and say this is written by Karen Palmer, but that was important to me for that particular piece of that particular textbook. CC by NC ND means that you can copy it and distribute it, you cannot change it, and you cannot sell it. So the CC by ND, you can't change it, but you can incorporate it into your own work as long as, and you can sell it. But the CC by NC ND, you can't change anything and you can't make a profit off of that content. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, and I just went backwards for some reason. Okay, so we're gonna practice this. So I'm going to stop my share. So what I want us to do is we're going to go and find a Creative Commons licensed image on the web, and we're going to practice citing, creating an attribution for that image, just so that we kind of get the hang of how to create a citation or an attribution for a Creative Commons. Okay, so here is a link. I hope that will take you to the Creative Commons site. So I'm going to, you can also go to Flickr. So you can look at Flickr also. And I think if you just Google Flickr, that should work. So most of the images on there. Okay, so here's the Creative Commons open verse. So I'm going to change this to be images, and I want to look for an image. So St. Patrick's Day is coming up. I'm a mom and I do lots of stuff for my kids. Well, I don't really want to see St. Patrick, but let's see if we can find. So you can see there's over 10,000 results. Let's see what kind of filters we can put on this. We're just going to do, so we can choose over here what Creative Commons licensing we want. So I'm just going to do the by and the by SA. I'm cool with that. I'm cool with non-commercial, and I want illustrations and JPEGs. Oh, I made it too restrictive. So let's see here. I've got pictures of people, which is not really what I was looking for here. Well, here's a fun dog. So I'm going to pick this dog. Okay, so I'm wondering if you all are following along with me, but if you're not, that's okay. You can just watch. So I'm going to, if I look down here, I can see the name of this image, St. Patrick's Day Puppy Dog Luna. I can see who it's by. I can see what the license is. It's a CC by 2.0. And I can also go to the images website. So the fun thing on this website is that the attribution is already here. Okay, so we have the title, we have the author, and we have the license, and you'll notice that these are all linked. So we always want to, if we can, link directly to the source. We can link directly to the author if the author has a link to them. It looks like this is their Flickr account where this image came from. And then you want to link to the license on the creativecommons.org. The parts of a Creative Commons license are the title, the author, the source, so the link, in this case that's the link, and then the license itself. So here's another example. We have the title, Creative Commons 10th Birthday Celebration San Francisco, and that is linked. So that's this part, the source. TVOL, TVOL is the author, also linked, and then the license, which is linked. Okay, so what I want you all to do is I want you to practice. So take the image that you found, and I want you to create a citation and just put it in the chat. So you were not going to be able to link it in the chat. That's okay. So just you want your title, your author, and the license. of that source. And we'll just pretend all the links are there. But sometimes, for some reason, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around this, because especially if you're, if you teach English or anything like that where citation is really important, we're used to having these really specific guidelines, right? APA or MLA or Chicago, Turabian, all of these different ways of citation that are very, very specific. And so, you have to have things in certain formats, and Creative Commons is just a little bit loosey-goosey. It can feel like that at first. So it's really important just to kind of think through that. Good, Erin. That's perfect. I'm looking at the chat. Angie, that looks fantastic. Yeah, so it's really easy to do this. And sometimes it feels like I'm not doing this right, because all I'm doing is like linking, but that's really all that this is. And so that's one of the beauties of Creative Commons, is that it's really easy to use, but it's also really easy to give those attributions, to give credit where credit is due. At the same time, you're changing things up. You could, that's a really great question, Erin. So Erin's asking, if you know that you were going to print OER materials, would you expand the attribution and write out the website address? I think it's all about the spirit of this. I think there would be nothing wrong with that. I think that would be great. If your materials are primarily online and students are just printing them for their own use, then I don't know that I would do that. But if you're always going to be printing those materials, then I think that I would write out the website address in parentheses or something, just to make sure that you were showing exactly where that came from. Good, Patrick. Yeah, so the traditional citation it doesn't really work because it's OER. And so if you cite it in one of those formats, then you're losing the Creative Commons licensing a little bit, the spirit of that, because then people don't realize that it's Creative Commons licensed and they can remix it. So even if it's printed out, you can still take in and remix it as long as it has the license there. But then if you include the website addresses, then folks can use the actual original source. And here's the interesting thing. So if in my textbook, let's say I've put an image, maybe not an image, maybe I pulled a paragraph from something and I put it into my textbook and I revised it, and I have the attribution in my textbook that says, adapted from, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, adapted from blank. And so I have that attribution. But then someone comes along, they find a printed version of my textbook, and they adapt that paragraph. They adopt that paragraph and adapt it. They're going to use my textbook as the attribution. So they're not going to go back to the original source. They're going to say, this content was adapted from The Worry-Free Writer by Karen Palmer and is licensed, blah, blah, blah. So it's an interesting situation there. Yeah, there's a lot of attribution builders out there. So if you're not sure, you can use any of those. I think it's just in the class that I teach, a lot of times faculty have trouble just wrapping their minds around this. And so it's just allow yourself to just take it easy and say, oh, this is easy. I can do this. I'm just linking to where things go. But yeah, use the attribution builders. There's lots of tools out there. Another beautiful part of the OER movement. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next piece, which is adopting and adapting. So this is really like the whole point, right, of OER, is being able to figure out what you can use, what you need, so that your students don't have to pay $200 for a textbook. So there are a couple of steps in adopting and adapting, and I'm kind of shrinking this down. It's crash course, remember? So at Yavapai College, our class is 6 weeks long. So we give faculty 6 weeks to go through the class. There's 6 modules. So we are really, really condensing this today. But I hope you all still get some great stuff out of it. Okay, so the first step is to determine your needs. Then you do some research, choose the resource that you want to adopt. adapt the resource, and then license it. So we're going to very quickly go through this process together. Okay, so the first step is determining your needs. One of the things that we give faculty in our module, or in this module in our course, is this little worksheet where it's a table, and you put your module, you put the lessons that are in the module, you put the assignments that go along with the lessons, you include the learning outcomes, and then you kind of say whether you have or you don't have the OER resource for that particular thing. So maybe here it's a video. So the video, maybe you don't have that video yet, so you've got to go and find a video that's open licensed. Maybe they're reading from a textbook. Maybe you have an OER chapter from a textbook that you want them to read. But it's really important to kind of think through, just like you would if you had to adopt a new textbook. You go through your class and you say, okay, well, here's this outcome. You start with your learning outcomes, right? And then you figure out how you're going to break those out throughout your class. And then you figure out how you're going to assess those outcomes. So, you know, in my classes, I teach a lot online. So that's how my mind breaks things down is, okay, here's the outcome. So here's the assignment that I'm going to use to assess the outcome. Here's the practice that students need to get to that assignment. Here's the reading that they need to understand the practice, and that you can kind of go backwards or forwards. So in my module, students do reading, they do a discussion, they maybe have a quiz on the reading, then they do some kind of writing assignment or build toward a writing assignment through each week in the class. So you want to think about, what do you need? A really great, I'm going to see if I can copy this link and put it in the chat. Okay, so I'm hoping that you all can see, do you all see the Hagerstown Community College site? Thank you, Erin. Okay, so right down here is a course mapping spreadsheet. And I'm going to open it, but I don't think you're going to be able to see it. This is what it looks like. I think this is just like super awesome. So you can put your information about your course here, your description, your course outcomes, and then you can just then you build out from there. So you can create your map. So you have your module, your course outcomes, the module outcomes, the topics you're covering, what the reading is. This goes really very far in depth, and even has a clock hour calculator. This is just an awesome resource. So if you all need that, I just happened to stumble on this in preparing for this presentation, and it's just like fantastic. So anyways, you want to figure out what you actually need. You don't want to just start out without a plan. So you're making a plan for what resources do you need. So when I was creating my textbooks, that meant that I had to look at what I was currently using, how I was teaching my classes, and say, okay, so for this section of the course, I need students to understand how to read poetry. So I'm going to either create that content on my own, or I'm going to go see if I can find a literature book that's OER somewhere that talks about how to read poetry. And then I can adopt that information and adapt it to my needs. But it starts out with determining what your needs are. Okay, so then you're going to do your research, and I've put in here just some ideas, and you all can just Google these, but there's the Open Textbook Library, OpenStax, BC Campus, SUNY has open textbooks, the OER Commons has open textbooks, Merlot, Teaching Commons, Lumen, Kali eBooks, Project Gutenberg, those are all resources in the public domain. Purdue has EPUBs. So Wikipedia, the online encyclopedias, the British Library, these are options also that are Creative Commons licensed. And this was a stumbling block for me a little bit because, you know, I always tell my students, no, you can't use Wikipedia as a source in your research papers because it's not considered, you know, an academic source. We always tell students not to use Wikipedia. And yet, you know, years and years ago, I remember a study when Wikipedia first came out that showed that it was more accurate than Britannica. But the reason that we normally tell students, or that I normally tell students not to use Wikipedia as a source, is that anybody can edit it. So the information might be perfectly accurate this second, but some person wants to, like, do a spoof or something, and they go in and edit it, and then you've got inaccurate information. So it's an interesting leap in thinking to say, okay, well, now I'm going to use some Wikipedia content in my class because it's open content and it's free for students. But, I don't know about y'all, but if I want to find out some basic information about something, Wikipedia is the first place I go, whether if it's a biography or something in history or whatever. I go there first to get the basic idea, and then I know how to do research. So I've been starting to share that with students. And really, I try to avoid Wikipedia and those some of those online things. Although the British Library I used a lot in my rhetoric class because they have a lot of fantastic images that are licensed Creative Commons, and some great historical information in there that is licensed. It's not all licensed Creative Commons, but some of it is, and it's really fantastic information. So what we're going to, well, we're going to do an exercise in a second, but first let's talk about why. So once you've found your resource, you're going to adapt it or basically revise it. So there are a couple of really good reasons to adapt a resource. One is to make it more accessible. Another one is to address cultural differences. A third is because you have a different audience. So, maybe a resource is geared toward, could be a younger group of students than you have. It could be a more advanced group of students, and you want to adjust the level of the audience. It may just be that maybe the content was created for professionals and you want to gear it towards students. So revising it for a different audience is important, and it could also be your teaching situation. Maybe you want to use it as an exercise rather than as a reading assignment, or vice versa. And so you're going to adapt that content to fit your situation in the class that you're teaching. So just a few of the options. You can translate a text. You can correct it so that you might find some editing errors, or maybe there was incorrect information or something. You can edit that. You can update it. So a lot of times you can find Creative Commons content from, even 5 years ago in some fields, even a year ago in some fields, and it's outdated. So you can update it. This is something that we have a lot of nursing faculty that are trying to do, OER resources, and that's something that can be really attractive because that nursing students every year have a fresh set of textbooks to purchase. My daughter's a nursing student, and it's, $1,000 or something a year just in her textbooks because the information is new every year. But with OER, you can just update that information every year without having to buy a whole new textbook package. You can also add to it. And of course, you can remix it. You can take things out. You can do all kinds of things with it. But you want to think about what your purpose is too. Just like we tell students, you've got to plan it out and you've got to think about it. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And do it with intention. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a little exercise. So I'm actually going to have you all go to Wikipedia, and we're going to find something that has to do with your field. So if you know that there's something like that you teach that you want to use, you could do that. You could look up, just something that you're interested in. It doesn't really matter what you're going to look up, but we're just going to go ahead and go to Wikipedia, and we're going to look up anything. That's what I'm going to do. I am designing a Shakespeare class this summer, so I'm going to look up Shakespeare. So let's say that I want to adopt this biography of Shakespeare. So, and this is, let me just tell you real quick, one of the reasons that Wikipedia is really nice is that the images are normally Creative Commons licensed also. So if you need a quick image of an author or a historical figure from one of your classes, they have fantastic images that you can use in your OER resources. But let's say I want to adapt this little piece. So I'm going to take this content. Can you all see this Google Doc? Someone give me a thumbs up if you can see the Google Doc. Thank you, Erin. Okay, so I'm just going to paste my content, maybe. There we go, right in here. And I'm going to give you all a link to this too here in a minute. And I'm going to actually reduce this because this is a lot. So maybe just pick a paragraph instead of a lot of it. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to revise this. Like I feel like students maybe don't need to know when he was baptized, and maybe they don't need to know like all of this stuff. I can just say 1564 to 1616. And I want to get rid of all of these little links here. So you can just revise your content however you like. And let me go ahead and give you all, actually, let me get the link here. And I'm going to send it to you all in the chat so you have a place to work also. Okay, so all you all have to do then is just kind of put your name in the author section and then post your paragraph in the next little section. It might get a little messy as everyone works on this together, but that's okay. This is kind of a fun thing to do with students. But we're just going to go through and we're going to edit. And my first edit is to remove all of the links. And we're just going to do a little bit of editing here. I just want you all to kind of see how easy this is. Okay, so once I have my edited version, I want to create my attribution. Okay, so when we license this, I'm going to post this link real quick in the chat. This is a link to a wiki that you guys might want to grab and save for later, but it tells you how to write an attribution for a source that you are changing. But basically, this is what we want to do, and I'm going to also paste this in the chat for you all. It's a little basic format. And I'm also going to put it into the Google Doc that we're all working on together under my attribution so you can see that. I'm going to follow this little format. So this work, and we're going to do the title of a work. So I'm going to title this About Shakespeare. And then it's a derivative of, so I've got to go back to Wikipedia, and they called theirs William Shakespeare. So I'm going to go back to my doc, and I'm going to change this to William Shakespeare. And then I can look down. Usually at the very bottom of the Wikipedias is the citation. Down here is my license, and it says, I'm just going to say Wikipedia because you can't really, it's not really by, it's been edited by a lot of people. So I think that's just what I'm going to put in here. And then I can go back and I can just copy their license down here. Hello. Okay, so here's their license. And I'm going to use the same license because it's an essay, so that means I have to use the same license. I'm going to put my name here, and then here is my title, About Shakespeare. And I'm going to link to the original source. Okay, and there I have it. So now I have successfully adopted and adapted this paragraph. And what I would want to do is wherever this paragraph was, I would want to put this attribution with it. So I would put it over here, maybe change my, so if I added this to my Canvas course, or if I added this to a textbook that I was working on, anything like that, I would want to make sure that I had this attribution on the page somewhere at the bottom, wherever, so that people could find it easily. So they would know they could take this and they could revise it. Okay. So I'm going to let you guys, looks like you guys are doing awesome. Perfect. I love all the different topics. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint because we're towards the end. Okay, so once we have licensed it, the next part is publishing it. And so that's what you guys are all doing. Putting it on that Google Doc is publishing your work. So that's optional, but that's when you're putting it in your Canvas class, or you're putting it in a Google Doc, or you're putting it into a textbook for your students to use. That's your publishing process there. So the next thing that we wanted to look at today is creating OER, and the process is much the same. You assess the needs that you have, then you create your content, and then you license it. So you're going to assess your needs and create it. It might be a syllabus, it might be a textbook, it might be a video, an image, a worksheet, an assignment, a PowerPoint, a handout, a wiki, could be anything. And then you're going to, and so what we just created, this Google Doc, that's an example of OER. It's a Google Doc, and it's all of us working together to create this kind of wiki. It's like a, I don't know, we'll just call it that, a wiki. So we can go ahead and license that. So when we license it, we can go to that. Here's another license chooser that you can use. We can go there and choose which license we want to use. And I think we could just do a CC BY. I mean, we'd have to look at, because all of if anyone chose a different license than I did, if it has the SA in it, then we have to use the exact same one. So we just want to make sure that we compare that, but we just do the same thing. So let me go back to sharing. Share that browser, and I'll go back in here. So then I would just, up here at the top, I would say, just getting started, adopt and adapt exercise by Aaron Palmer, licensed CC BY SA. And then I would link to the license. And so you can always just go to Creative Commons and get the license. And then I wouldn't have to put the link to the exercise because we're on the exercise. So I wouldn't have to link to that. And I wouldn't necessarily link to myself because I don't really have anything that I want to link to myself to. But that's how simple it is to create the license. So once you create something, if you want to license it as OER, you just give it a title, put your name on it, and choose a license, and then link to that license. And you have created an OER work and correctly licensed it. It's that easy. Okay, so multiple different ways in Google Docs and Canvas and Pressbooks and Merlot. There's lots of different resources I'm sure you all are learning about during this conference, so you can publish it anywhere, and that is how you do it. All right, so we have 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see faces. Have you run into students complaining OER? You know what, Erin? I have not ever run into students saying that OER is plagiarism. I don't think they're really thinking about it. But I did, especially in my English 101, 102 textbook, I tried to find sources that were not Wikipedia. And that is a really good conversation to have, because especially if you have higher level students, I'm looking in particular at, if you have education students and you're trying to explain to them the benefits of using OER for their students, having that conversation about, what is plagiarism, which plagiarism is using someone's work without citing it. So even with OER, you're citing it, you're giving the attribution, you're telling who the work is from, you're not claiming it as your own. You're saying it came from somewhere. So even if you are using that work word for word and saying, okay, well, here's this book and I'm going to make it into this book, you're still having to say this content came from somewhere. So I think that's how I would do that, and I think it just is a really good conversation to have. And that's something I think we have to think through too as we're starting to use OER. Anyone else? But thank you all so much for coming. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.